Hi, and welcome to another episode of She Leads Biotech, the podcast where we celebrate the achievements of women in the life sciences. Today's guest is a physician and global health leader whose career has been shaped by a passion for improving care for women and children worldwide. She began her medical training in India, where early exposure to resource-limited healthcare systems opened her eyes to the realities of global health. That experience led her into pediatrics, then pediatric infectious diseases, and on into work focused on HIV and tuberculosis. Her move into industry brought her clinical expertise into the world of diagnostics, where she has become a leading voice on improving access, closing diagnostic gaps, and ensuring that every patient, regardless of geography or circumstance, can be accurately diagnosed and effectively treated. As a leader, she's known for her collaborative style, her belief in leading from behind, and her commitment to building high-performing teams grounded in integrity, curiosity, and purpose. She's thoughtful, mission-driven, and deeply respected for the global perspective she brings to some of the most pressing challenges in healthcare today. So please welcome VP of Medical Affairs at Cepheid, Devasena Gnanashanmugam. Hey, Devesena, good morning.
Good morning. How are you, Sharon?
I'm well. Well, I'm a bit chilly, actually, because it's freezing in New York right now, but there you go. I'm not going to complain. And what about where you are?
I am fortunate to be spending time in Florida, so it's bright and sunny here.
Okay, I shouldn't have asked that, should I? I shouldn't have asked if I don't want the answer. That you're in the warmth, aren't you?
I
You're
am. I am
okay.
very lucky.
Well, listen, from sunny Florida to freezing New York, thank you so much for joining us today. I've been following your career for some time, and I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to
It's my
chat with you
pleasure.
about your work. But how did it all start for you? I know that you're a pediatrician, right? Was that something you always wanted to do? Did you fall into it by accident? What was the journey?
Yeah, so I grew up in Florida, but went to medical school in India, and that's really kind of where, my career started. I was very lucky to have that experience. It was not easy, having, being very different culturally, the environment, all of that was very different from what I grew up doing. But that's really where I began to understand what we now call global health and
Right.
really what are the challenges in many places that are resource limited and what all that feels like. So that was a really good learning experience for me. That's really where my career started. From there, I finished med school. I then went to Chicago to do pediatric residency and then finished my training at Stanford in California as a pediatric infectious diseases fellow. So, infectious diseases was sort of the natural progression for me, wanting to learn more about global health and keep my foot in that door and learn more again about what are the ways that people who are less fortunate than the rest of us in the Western world, how do they deal with health? And what are the things that we can do to bridge that inequality and that equity gap?
Right. And was medical school, was it always that? I mean, what was the story?
I was actually really open to what the future would look like. I was very interested, though, very early on in my life with this idea of making an impact internationally, wanting to understand what was happening in the world globally. I was interested a little bit in international relations. I didn't know what that really looked like, but I knew that I wanted to do something that had relevance on the globe, on a global sphere, and
Right.
not something, that was very confined to just something locally. So that was always something that I was really interested to do. When I was a kid, we would make frequent trips from the US to India because my parents and my home, their home was in India. So I loved to travel. I wanted that to be a part of what my life was like. So was very fortunate to be able to continue to do that.
Okay. And is there was there a patient or a career experience early in your medical career that stays with you, that had an impact?
Yes. When I reflect back and I think about my experiences in med school, I remember a woman who was pregnant, and it was during my pediatric rotation. And they were from a very not affluent family, and the woman delivered the baby, and it was later found out that the baby had a genetic disorder. So as you can imagine, the family was concerned. They weren't really sure what this all meant, but it wasn't a disorder that was life threatening. But the child would certainly look a little different from everyone else and would have some challenges. And I remember engaging with the family and saying, this is what's going on, of course, with my attending physicians and all the other supporting physicians there. And the family are receiving this information. And at that time, they understood the baby was not going to be like every other baby, but they said, that's okay. We love this child. Yes. And I can't, and that really stays with me even now. The idea that there are so many different ways of looking what is good fortune for families, and also to be a part of that family's experience, to be a physician, to be able to support them through this journey, and also to be a trusted source of information and to say, this is what's happening, this is what's going on, this is what we know so far. And also to communicate that there are always limitations with healthcare and the health that we provide. And in that situation, in retrospect, it was really interesting because it happened so many years ago. And to be able to say to a family, this is what we know today about this condition. But in pediatrics, that child is going to grow and that child is going to have so many more experiences, and healthcare will evolve and grow. So you have no idea what is going to be that child's life 10, 15 years from now, not just because there are so many things that we'll learn, but also because we'll get better at treatment. So it's just such a fulfilling and fascinating way to look at healthcare when you look at it from the perspective of women and children and child health.
You've been involved in global health, in particular TB, right?
That's right.
Why TB?
Yes. So I finished my training at Stanford and then did a little bit of work with research organizations. And then as I was a trainee at Stanford, was involved with HIV research. So that was a natural progression then for me to later go and work at the Division of AIDS at the NIH. And that was a fascinating experience, being again able to continue in that world of global health, and particularly in pediatric global health, help with researchers understand how to eliminate HIV in children. And with HIV, tuberculosis is its co-infection. It's a very common co-infection. So that's part of also how I got involved in the TB world. And to me, TB is just the most fascinating illness. I have always been interested in it. Obviously, in med school, we saw many, many patients in India who had tuberculosis. But also, when you look at TB, the problem of it, of course, is its own disease and how it's been with humans for hundreds of years. But the countries that have been able to eliminate it or reduce the incidence and prevalence of TB, they've done that not only because they've been able to make TB specific care more available to people, but because overall they've improved economic conditions for their people. So it's really a disease of society, of poverty, and it's about social justice. And that's very close to my heart. Again, coming back to the idea of how can we make healthcare equitable? How can we give the best healthcare to as many people as we can?
And I'm sure that in your career, you've seen healthcare at work across a number of continents and countries within those continents. And I should think there's a huge disparity in treatment, in outcomes with that. What have you seen?
Absolutely. So the TB story is a classic example of this, where, generally speaking, the highest burden of tuberculosis, even within countries, are in areas of poverty. So when now in my career and where I am, I do work not only with TB, with multiple other diseases, and predominantly I work in a company, Cepheid, where we do molecular diagnostics. So I'm in the diagnostics field. But what we see are the disparities in being able to access diagnostics overall. So infectious diseases still plays a very big role in disease burden globally. Granted, there are a lot of other chronic illnesses now that are taking its toll on humans, and that's causing a lot of burden, but infectious diseases still plays a very big part in that. Within that, if you are specifically looking at infectious diseases, what we've said in our field is you find the bug so you can get the drug.
Right.
Right? So you want that nice combination of I've got the bug and I've got the drug, and we should make you better. But it starts with finding the bug. And that's where diagnostics really plays a key role here. If we can find out what is that pathogen that's causing your illness, we are so ahead of the game. And that doesn't always happen. What we've seen is that, in fact, when you look at what we call the care cascade, so from screening to confirming diagnosis and then to getting care and then cure, that whole patient journey, diagnostics is one of the biggest, if not the biggest gap, meaning many people don't have access to good diagnostics. Once you've identified the illness, you can treat them and then cure them depending on the disease, and that gets a lot better. But that diagnostic gap still remains globally, and that's part of so much of the work that I've been doing at Cepheid.
Right. Yeah, I want to delve more into to your work in Cepheid, because was that your first foray into industry after practicing as a doctor? That was the first job you went into, right?
Well, I was at a research organization, a contract research organization, PPD,
Right.
before, and then from there I went to the NIH, and from the NIH I joined Cepheid. So, if you divide your life into different sectors, that would still be considered an industry position, but it wasn't with a dedicated company that was looking at a certain specific product. It was providing support services for clinical trials. So that was my first adventure into industry, and I learned so much from that. I learned about the rigor that it takes when you're conducting clinical trials. So I also am very lucky to have the background of doing monitoring for therapeutics and infectious disease therapeutics, but that's really where I started in industry.
Right. That was at PPD.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So what led you to Cepheid?
So Cepheid was a progression because of the work that I've been doing at the Division of AIDS. I knew that I wanted to continue to expand the different environments that I was working in. I had a mentor who was at Cepheid when I first joined. I knew her from being in at Stanford. So I called her up and said, "Are you looking?" And she said, "Well, I'm not sure, but put your hat in the ring and see what happens," like so many things in life. So that's where I joined. And I wanted to join Cepheid because of the work that they were doing in tuberculosis. So if I tell people this a lot, if I knew then what I know now about how little I knew about diagnostics, I'm not sure I would have taken the job. It was such a steep learning curve because my background had really been largely in therapeutics up until that time. But it's been an amazing and wonderful experience. And I think it really drives home the value and the skill that it takes in order to create these tests. I can tell you comfortably, and I think a lot of physicians would agree, as a physician, I think we largely take this for granted. We really make a lot of assumptions about tests that we're performing, and we make so many assumptions about how well they're going to perform. We don't go into the level of detail that manufacturers and other folks who are working in the lab go into about how good is this? What is its sensitivity? What is its specificity? What are the specimen types that you're using? Can I use this test with any specimen that I decide I need? And then also across population. So for example, if you're looking at tests that are evaluating a host response to a certain disease, that can be very different depending on geography, depending on the age of the patient, depending on their state of immunocompromise. These are so many things that actually factor into the tests that are being developed now. And that many of us, we have the luxury, I would say, that we don't think about. But as you're trying to bring these tests to market, these are the factors you have to consider in order for them to be successful. So I have a lot of respect for all of the different people who go into creating these tests and putting that level of diligence and rigor and honestly sweat and grit into making these possible for the rest of us.
And it's getting a lot more press now, diagnostics, isn't it? I've noticed probably the only good thing to have come out of COVID, I guess, that you know, home diagnostics and things like that were thought that's never going to happen, suddenly was the norm. What do you think that's going to mean for the future of medicine and how diagnostics is going to impact that?
Yes, I completely agree with you. I think one of the silver linings with COVID has been how people now are paying attention to diagnostics and how important it was during the pandemic to understand, number one, do you have this? Because obviously COVID-19 could mimic so many other respiratory illnesses, and having that understanding and pathogen identification up front was critical. And as a result, I think we've been very fortunate that so many other companies actually got into this space. You know, they really began to figure out, well, what is necessary? What were their resources? Cepheid is a good example of how quickly we were able to mobilize resources to try to get a test to market. Many people started entering into this space. And yes, it got a little crowded, but I would say in the long run, this has been a gift for all of us. Now we have a greater understanding of the importance of diagnostics. And I think right now, the challenge is going to be what now? What next? Because obviously we're seeing a decline in the amount of testing that's happening for SARS-CoV-2. And now we've got these tests on the market. What do we do? How do we pivot next? What does the next iteration of all of this look like? I think the importance will be to double down and rethink what are those illnesses that are impacting people in the here and now. For example, influenza remains very important. Obviously, we're hearing about surges in different parts of the world at the moment. So that's one example of a respiratory illness that still matters. And it's important, I think, to remember that if you have a test out there, it's still going to matter how to get that test as close as you can to patients and to. So I say all this meaning the problem has not disappeared just because COVID is not a pandemic anymore. The problems that we have still remain. All of the disparities in health and diagnostics across different populations, they remain pre-pandemic, they're still here. So manufacturers could really begin to look more closely, and healthcare systems overall to look closely and say, how can we mobilize the existing resources that we have to get to as many people as we possibly can? It takes coordination, it takes partnership, but that's what I would say is going to make an impact in the future.
And what is your role at Cepheid? I don't think I've ever asked you.
I'm Vice President of Medical Affairs at Cepheid. And people ask me that, well, what does that mean, medical affairs? And it's actually a very cool job, I would say. I say that because, like I mentioned before, I get to travel to so many places in the world and speak to other providers and learn about how they provide health to the people that they serve. And that can be very different depending on where you're practicing medicine.
Yeah.
So I get to meet so many people and discuss what are their challenges and basically take that information back to the company and be able to say, these are the unmet needs. How can we begin to think about the future, our pipeline, what we're providing to meet those needs? That's a big part of what I do. The other part of what I do is very much safety related. Of course, there is never going to be, a product that is perfect. So understanding when things don't quite meet people's expectations, being able to assist with those questions. Other areas that we work in are answering questions that people have about the test overall, and then meeting customers, giving presentations about our product, making sure that people understand the clinical and medical significance behind these. So it's a very interesting and cool job, and I'm very lucky to work with the teams that I'm working with right now. I'm very proud of the team that I lead. They're dedicated, hardworking, and fun people.
And what's your leadership style working with a team of people?
Like I said, I'm very lucky to have a group that is highly educated, very professional, and they want to work hard. They want to be challenged. They want to make an impact in the world. So when you have that foundation, my job becomes so much easier. So that's in answering the question about my leadership style. I guess I'd really have to start there and say, this is my baseline. So leading this group makes it so much easier because they're so skilled and competent and professional. But I really believe in the idea of leading from behind. I think that is so important. And I think that, as women, it can be challenging to embrace that. As women, I think I I think we struggle a little bit with making sure people see us as larger than we should be, or make sure you are larger than you are, kind of thing, wanting to be able to fill that space. But that doesn't always mean that you have to be the one-man band, and that doesn't mean that, everything rests on your shoulders. I think for me, my learning has been really being able to embrace the success of my team. And I get such a sense of satisfaction when they succeed. I've had the opportunity to lead folks who were not as visible. And now some of these folks are the people that are the most requested. Hey, can you have this person help us with this? And I have to pull back and go, no, they've got enough on their plate. Like,
From my
back
team.
off a little bit.
Fine.
Exactly. And I honestly think if you have a strong team, you don't feel so much as you're leading them as you're supporting them. And you're really trying to help them be the best version of themselves. And that gives me a lot of satisfaction.
And what do you see as the differentiator between leading from behind, as you said, where so many people talk about leading from the front? Where do you see the differentiator and the benefits to a team of having that leader that is there kind of pushing them forward?
I think, in all honesty, I think there needs to be a little bit of both. And so when I say, for example, leading from the front, I truly also believe in leading by example.
Right.
So if you were to ask me, what does that mean to lead from the front? That's what I would say. And I'm a firm believer in the ways that we show up and influence culture in our different groups. I think it's very subtle. I think it's something that we all take for granted. But when we show up in a way that demonstrates integrity, that demonstrates trust, that demonstrates openness, those are all ways that I think you are, in fact, leading from the front because you're setting the example for your team. So I think that is actually critical, and that's very important. Leading from behind, I interpret to mean allowing people to thrive, understanding what makes them tick, understanding what are the ways that they are challenged and that are obstacles that you can help remove, but also understanding that most high-performing teams, which I have, they want to be challenged. They don't like to be bored. They want to feel like they show up for work and it matters, and they want to feel like their strengths are being utilized to the best capacity in service of the company or in service of their organization. So understanding that, I think, is also about leading from behind. Understanding who are the people on your team, what makes them tick, what do they want to do, how can you find that alignment with their strengths and aligning with your organization strategy and what are the mission and the vision for the organization so that you can come together and have everybody participate and show up in the best way that they can.
And so sometimes it's push, sometimes it's pull, and it's working around with the team. And one of the things that interests me, obviously, as a physician going into industry, how do you feel that physicians contribute within pharma, within those kind of companies and the skills they bring to an organization?
Yeah, this is something that's actually also very close to my heart. I think that in the years that I have been at Cepheid, and even while I was previously at PPD, I noticed a shift in organizations understanding the role that physicians are playing within their company. I think previously there was very heavy focus on the aspect of pharmacovigilance and safety monitoring and medical monitoring. And also there's more of the division of sort of medical science liaisons who are very in touch with customers. But I think now what we're also seeing is understanding how the physicians in their entirety of their experience can contribute to industry. And what I mean by that is not only understanding the full spectrum of all that they've been exposed to. They see things from the patient's perspective. They see things from the provider's perspective. If you're in diagnostics and you have a background in pathology or laboratory medicine, you also see that from the perspective of a lab. So understanding and for companies to fully capitalize on that full spectrum and holistic experience, I think it becomes a strength for certain companies if they're able to do that really well.
Yeah.
I also think the piece that sometimes is not as heavily recognized, particularly for physicians, is all the experience they've gone through in clinical care. So, for example, being a resident, being up all those late hours, being called up at 2 a.m. Those are all things that people don't necessarily want to do or appreciate. But when you've had that experience, you also are looking at pivoting quickly, being able to absorb information that you're being given at a very specific moment in time and making a decision based off of that quickly. I think it's also that physicians have had to give families and patients bad news. So they also have, what was previously called soft skills, but those
Yep.
other skills of relating to people. And these are all things I think that really can set different companies apart if physicians and their strengths are utilized.
In the right way.
Right.
So you've done all this work as a physician leader, and I do want to touch on that experience as a woman. What's it been like? Have you noticed any differences, or are you just oblivious to I just do the work I'm doing?
Yeah, the people will say that infectious disease physicians, they probably fall a little bit into that second category, right? We are the kind of people who want to rely on data as much as we possibly can. We want to put our head down. We want to do our work. And like I said before, tell me what the bug is, tell me what the drug is. I'll put all of this together and I'll give you an answer. And, thank you very much. So there's part of that. I think that is intrinsic to the field. But I also think that that isn't enough. And particularly as women leaders, it has served me very well to rely on that foundation and to rely on what are the facts, what are the data, what does the evidence show? Because that I think is something in this day and age is maybe getting less importance than it used to in the past. But for me, it is still foundational. And I think for those who are in the field, when you show up, no matter who the audience is, if you show up with that level of confidence because you know your subject matter well, you have that depth of understanding and you know what you're talking about. And you're not talking only based on opinion. You're talking about all of this based off of data and evidence. That's a strength. So for me, that has served me very, very well. But I will also say that that's not enough. I'll also say that as a woman, I think what has also served me well is relying on other people, being able to extend my hand and say, help me, saying, I want to partner with you. I want to collaborate with you. Let me work with you to understand how we both can succeed together. That has been absolutely a strength. And that's also where your work becomes fun because you're reaching out to people, having great conversations about science and then finding out about their lives. And now you've got a common bond to say, we want to work together to make all of us succeed. So it ties really back into this idea of equity and how can we all live better lives?
How can we build on what we're building, build further
That's
on
right.
onto that? That's incredible. So, what advice would you give to your younger self stepping into medicine for the first time?
I think whether to my younger self or to young women who are entering into the field of medicine or any in medicine very broadly as a subject, I would say you have more power than you think. I would say things seem like they're very linear and that one thing leads to another, but that's not how life unfolds. And I would say to them, dream big because those are the dreams that are going to come true. And you have resources that you probably are ignoring. If you expand a little bit the way that you're approaching life, the way that you're approaching a problem, and allow some more openness, you are more than likely going to achieve those goals that you had, and it is possible. So that's what I would say. There's a lot out there, and your life is going to take you into places that you did not imagine. And for the most part, I think it's going to be a wonderful, amazing journey.
And enjoy the ride.
That's right, 100%.
Well, listen, Devasena, I am so thankful for the time that you've spent with us today. I've just got one last question for you. What's the one belief that's really kind of carried you through some of the most difficult times that you've been through or the hardest moments, either in industry or in medicine?
I think for me, it's really about partnership and collaboration. In the worst of times, it's really easy to feel alone. And that's, I think, to me, my experience has been in those days that feel the darkest. That's also part of why it feels so dark, because you feel like you're going through whatever pain that you're going through all by yourself. And I think for me, the the biggest lesson for me has been you're not alone. And when you do reach out and you ask for support or you help other people and you connect, that's when we feel alive again. And that's also when we are more than likely to succeed. There are very, very few examples of that one person who changed the course of history or who changed science. And they exist, no doubt. But for the most part, we've gotten to where we are as a civilization because we've stood on the shoulders of giants and we've been working off of all that knowledge and all those institutional achievements that we've made as humanity. And that's what is going to keep us alive and thriving moving forward. So that's what I would say. If you were to ask me that question, it would be about collaboration and partnerships and connect.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to let you go back to the sunshine begrudgingly. It's really been a pleasure speaking to you today, and I've really enjoyed your insights. I think there's a lot going on in the field of diagnostics at the moment, and that's only going to get stronger, I think. And it's lovely to know that there are women like you behind that, pushing those things forward. That's going to help humanity somewhere along the line in the future. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sharron. It's been really a pleasure. And I appreciate having the space and the opportunity to share my thoughts. I can't thank you enough.
Love it. Enjoy the rest of your time.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining me for this episode of She Leads Biotech. If today's story inspired you, subscribe, follow, and comment. Because when one woman's voice is heard, many more find theirs. Until next time, stay curious, stay courageous, and keep leading.